The rivalry between the Sinaloa Cartel and the Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación is being felt not just in Mexico, but increasingly across the world. Despite the fact that the much older Sinaloa Cartel has much better established foreign ties and has been the pioneer in creating a worldwide footprint, CJNG is actively moving into new regions overseas in order to catch up with or replace the Sinaloa Cartel. How has these two big Mexican cartels controlled and dominated the supply of fentanyl in America and all over the world? If you'd like to find out, then stay tuned to the end of the video. The competition between them has exacerbated violence, or caused new wars in several places in Latin America. The growth of the two cartels in Europe and Asia also brings the danger of more violence and coke-related fatalities, depending on the decisions made by the two cartels and their international competitors. The Sinaloa Cartel and the CJNG are well known in the United States for their presence and conduct. And the two cartels control the wholesale trafficking of narcotics in the United States, including fentanyl, snow, and methamphetamine. Fearing the might of U.S. law enforcement, they act with remarkable restraint and peace in comparison to their operations in Mexico. In the U.S., they don't engage in large shootouts or attack police officers, despite the fact that Mexican criminal groups have attempted to corrupt U.S. Border Patrol agents. Violence in U.S. coke retail marketplaces varies throughout the nation and doesn't primarily involve the two cartels. Most retail markets in the United States are quiet by Mexican standards. Just a few, generally in locations with strong local gang violence fueled by various sources, such as Baltimore or Chicago, have high murder rates. In contrast, the presence of the Sinaloa Cartel and CJNG in Latin America has often directly sparked bloodshed as the two cartels strive to remove each other, or demand that their local trafficking friends and proxies deal only with them. Since about 2010, Mexican cartels have been coming to Colombia and establishing the permanent presence of their agents to oversee not just traffic from Colombia's borders, but also production, processing, trafficking, and local networks. The 2008 extradition to the United States of strong Colombian cartel lord Diego Murillo Bejarano, Don Berna, whose Oficina de Envigado was a highly powerful Colombian cartel gang, was one of the reasons for their increased presence at the time. Don Berna's extradition shattered his criminal empire and reshaped relationships between Mexican cartels and remnants, and new Colombian cliques like Los Urabeos. These dynamics only became more intense during and after the 2016 peace agreement between the Colombian government and the Marxist guerrilla organization Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia Army Peoples, the FARC. The Colombian coke market was once again undergoing profound changes, but this time, CJNG was a new Mexican actor on the Colombian scene, and the Mexican cartel's involvement in changing the Colombian coke market was much more brutal. Investigation into the Colombian provinces of Antioquia, Meta, Nario, and Cauca in 2019 revealed that the two gangs were aggressively attempting to dominate coke sales from Colombian suppliers. CJNG attempted to convince minor and big Colombian criminal organizations, such as the Urabeos, to quit supplying the Sinaloa Cartel, much as it did to Mexico. The involvement of Mexican organizations became another key generator of violence in an already extremely violent, opaque, and rapidly changing criminal industry. CJNG was unable to marginalize the Sinaloa Cartel in Colombia, despite reducing its activities. Local Colombian conflicts are still shaped by the worldwide bipolar battle between the two Mexican cartels. Furthermore, the Mexican cartels contribute to the re-escalation of Colombia's hostilities by paying their Colombian suppliers for cocaine with high-quality weaponry. Both Mexican gangs are more heavily committed than ever in not just coke trafficking, but also manufacturing in Colombia. They've supported the development of high-yield coca varieties which generate high-quality profit cocaine in higher amounts from smaller areas. The bipolar war between the two Mexican cartels has recently spread to other parts of Latin America, including, but not limited to, the Northern Triangle, Nicaragua, Ecuador, and Peru, as well as Chile, which had previously escaped the intense crime violence patterns of many Latin American countries. Ecuador has been on the front burner this spring, with cartel-linked violence spilling outside prison walls and rising to the point that the Ecuador president announced a state of emergency in 3 coastal provinces in key smuggling areas: Esmeraldas, Guayas, and Manab. However, the two Mexican cartels' Latin American efforts don't necessarily result in more bloodshed. In April 2022, credible speculation circulated that the CJNG and the Sinaloa Cartel were attempting to broker a truce between Colombian armed groups operating on both sides of the Colombia-Venezuela border, including the ELN and Segunda Marquetalia. the most powerful of the FARC dissident groups, and the Cartel of the Suns, formed by corrupt Venezuelan security officers, in order to reduce their own violence. It is terrible for business if there's too much violent turmoil along a crucial transshipment route. The Mexican cartel's international actions, like their internal administration, are deliberate and well-planned. They're not simply opportunistic and reactive, but rather guided by long-term strategy, in which cartels make repeated strategic decisions about how to position themselves in relation to local law enforcement agencies, governments, and criminal groups, as well as how to mix violence, corruption, and evasion. Their strategic decisions and operations overseas, like those of politically motivated non-state armed organizations, most notably the Taliban, before it won control in Afghanistan last year, amount to de facto foreign policies. CJNG is boosting competitiveness all around the world. The Sinaloa Cartel, which is older and more inventive, has considerably more established foreign ties and pioneered development in Asia-Pacific. CJNG, on the other hand, is vigorously following suit. Meanwhile, changes in Sinaloa leadership and two other criminal markets events have fueled the Sinaloa Cartel's significantly more confrontational foreign policy than was the case until about 2015. The Sinaloa Cartel, led by Joaquin El Chapo Guzman Loera, started expanding import and export networks throughout the Asia-Pacific area in the 2000s. Sinaloa's entry into Asia was centered on obtaining methamphetamine precursors, for which Sinaloa started negotiating in Hong Kong with Chinese triads, including the two biggest, 14K and Sun Yilong. They dominated methamphetamine manufacturing in southern China, and they had easy access to precursors produced by China's booming pharmaceutical and chemical industries. Sinaloa gave them contracts while leaving a little imprint on the ground. El Chapo only gradually began experimenting with the formation of the Colombian snow market in Hong Kong and China. China's snow usage has been and continues to be dominated by heroin and meth supplied from Myanmar. Until 2013, the triads managed meth manufacture in southern China. After 2013 to 2014 Chinese government crackdown, production was shifted to Myanmar, where the triads kept control of meth trafficking across Asia-Pacific. Coca was significantly more costly than meth or heroin, and thus the coca market was restricted to the extremely wealthy. El Chapo was cautious not to walk on the toes of the triads while seeking to grow the cocaine market in China and Hong Kong. The triads became a vital conduit to consumers for the Sinaloa Cartel, in a remote nation with dramatically different cultures and languages. However, by 2021, CJNG had increased its global battle with the Sinaloa Cartel, attempting to penetrate the Hong Kong coca market and establishing a competing supply to undercut Sinaloa. This readiness of the CJNG to bring its competition with Sinaloa into Asia was one of the three factors that transformed the Sinaloa Cartel's cautious, discreet, and non-confrontational foreign policy in the Asia-Pacific area. The second was the beginning of the synthetic opioid tsunami in the United States. In contrast to Asia-Pacific triad-dominated meth trafficking, the supply of fentanyl and fentanyl precursors for the U.S. market became extremely pluralized. Hundreds of chemical producers and brokers have sprung up across China, ranging from mid-level chemical and pharmaceutical companies to newly emerging small family-based Chinese criminal groups and upstart operators to mom-and-pop organizations. However, with forethought, the Sinaloa Cartel built delivery networks in India. According to a former senior Australian law enforcement official, the uncontrolled export of all kinds of coca, including illegal synthetic coke and other precursors from India, is so extensive that Indian traders can easily supply global illegal markets with fentanyl and meth precursors if supply from China ever happens to run out. Aside from diversification, the third development in 2015 prompted substantial modifications in Sinaloa Cartel's Asia-Pacific strategy. With El Chapo on the run, decision-making inside the Sinaloa Cartel had shifted to numerous players, including his sons, known as Los Chapitos. With the bravado and combativeness that has characterized the Mexican market's narco juniors and leadership successions, and facing the super-aggressive and expansionist CJNG, Los Chapitos abandoned their father's caution in the Asia-Pacific and began peddling Mexican meth into Australia and New Zealand. Already, the Sinaloa Cartel and CJNG's push into Asia-Pacific meth markets pits them against the triads, changing a collaborative partnership into a combative one. Such competitiveness might lead to bloodshed, despite the fact that trafficking and distribution in Asia-Pacific are mostly non-violent compared to Latin America, and, as in Europe, where Mexican cartels are growing their activities. The major issue is when the Mexican cartels will begin distributing fatal fentanyl and synthetic opioids throughout Asia-Pacific, Already struggling to adapt to rising crystal meth use, the area is it's unable to cope with the public health destruction caused by synthetic opioids. A Chinese triad's Mexican cartel's conflict in the Asia-Pacific might potentially spill over into government foreign policy and geopolitical realms. Meanwhile, anti-crime cooperation between Mexico and Asia-Pacific nations remains exceedingly restricted. The US has the chance to begin encouraging such law enforcement coordination. So what are your opinions on the rivalry between the two main Mexican cartels? Let us know in the comment section below. And if you haven't done so already, make sure to subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss any of our content. Keep an eye out for the next video.